Okay, thank you for waiting. Sorry about that. Just wanted to hold just another minute there to let some other folks come in. So we may still have a few stragglers, but we'll go ahead and get started. I appreciate your patience. Just wanted to say welcome again here. My name is Craig Augie. I'm the exhibitions coordinator here at the library. And thank you so much for joining us tonight for this discussion and to view these wonderful works. This exhibition, by the way, will remain up through September 15th. So you have about a week and a half to come back and tell everyone you know to come and see it. I do have a few little bits of library business that I want to go over real quick while I have you here. Just to remind you that we have lots more great events happening just this month, as a matter of fact, here at Central, including the film screenings and discussions of Suppressed and Sabotaged, The Fight to Vote on Wednesday, September 11th, and Do We Belong on Wednesday, September 18th. As well as our 150th anniversary capstone event, An Evening with Margaret Atwood, Tuesday, September 24th. So there's RSVPs are required for that. So you can get more information on those and others, and again, RSVP at kclibrary.org/events. We also will open Fibers of Being, which is the Weavers Guild of Greater Kansas City 70th anniversary member selections show this Saturday, September 7th, downstairs in Goldner Gallery, which will be up through November 23rd. And then we will also open an exchange of gifts, which is the Art of Kansas City Public Library staff, October 5th, here in this gallery, featuring a wide variety of talents from our staff system-wide. And I think we have about 45 staff members who submitted work of all different kinds, so come back and check that out. Also, I want to just give a quick plug to the Heartland Book Festival, which returns for a second year this year in conjunction with Missouri Humanities and the Missouri Center for the Book. This time, a single-day event on Saturday, October 12th, including Deborah Jackson Taffa, Sarah Chappelle, Pedro Martin, Tommy Orange, and Michael Threets in conversation with Stacey Abrams, along with many other fun activities. So you can find out more at heartlandbookfest.org. Now, tonight we are joined by two of the featured artists here from Going Home, Mona Cliff and Tom Farris. Tom Farris spent his formative years immersed in American Indian art. As the child of avid art collectors, he was fortunate enough to regularly visit the homes of many studio artists. His own works often employ satire and pop art sensibilities to subvert common conceptions of Native Americans in popular culture. He has exhibited nationwide in prominent exhibitions such as the Southwestern Association for Indian Art's annual Indian Market, where he received the Creativity Award in 2015 and the Innovation Award in 2019. His works reside in the permanent collections of the Heard Museum in Phoenix, Arizona, the Idle Yorg Museum of American Indians and Western Art in Indianapolis, Indiana, and the Sam Noble Museum at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma, among others. Mona Cliff is originally from Fort Belknap, Montana, currently living in Lawrence, Kansas. She studied printmaking at Cornish College of Arts in Seattle, but now predominantly uses traditional native bead embroidery and fabric applique to explore contemporary Indigenous identity and culture. You can view two large-scale site-specific works in the permanent collection at Kansas City Museum, as well as a recently installed 17-foot beaded sculpture at the new Kansas City International Airport. She was also included in the 2024 New Worlds Women to Watch exhibition at the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C., which I think just closed recently, so, but congrats on that. And finally, this conversation is moderated by the wonderful painter and art instructor David Titterington, who has taught studio art and art history courses at Haskell Indian Nations University since 2015, and has also exhibited his own works in galleries nationwide. So we're fortunate to have all of you here tonight. We will converse for about 45 minutes or so, and then we will open it up to a Q&A. So without further delay, David, take it away.
Thank you so much, Craig. Greetings, beautiful friends and fellow students of art. Let's get to it. As an artist, I know I have a moment when I realized that art is it. Do either of you have that moment from your past that you can think of?
First of all, I'd just like to say I feel like I'm on the dating game.
The art dating game.
Can you repeat that question, please? And also something that David was a little scared to say, we are officially correct and starting on Indian time tonight. So
Right.
just get that out there. Okay, so just clarification, do you mean that, is there a point when I realized that art is what I wanted to do, or when I realized something is finished?
When you realized that you wanted to become a professional artist.
That took about 20 years and an art degree and self-realization. So about 40 is when I decided to pursue an art career.
Oh, wow, okay.
But I knew I was an artist from a very young age, but I took a long and winding path towards it. So it was kind of like ongoing to kind of have self-confidence to know that I wanted to do that or I could. But I always knew I was talented. I just didn't know how to pursue that. And then I understood after having my children. And then, they helped me. They have a way of condensing what you need to do, especially getting into your 40s too. So yeah, it was a long process. Yeah.
I'm still not sure I want to be a professional artist some days. I also took a long and winding road. I was more on the business side of native art for a very long time before I started actually dipping my toe into creating it. I had created a couple of pretty good size native art shows. I had worked for a couple of museums. I had my own gallery at one point. And I just kept having ideas that I would ask my friends. I was like, hey, I want you to paint me this, or I want you to make this. And finally one of them said, hey, why don't you make that? And I was like, okay, I'll figure out how to do that. And then I just kind of started making stuff. So I don't like to think of it so much as a job. I think once it starts becoming work, I will like it a lot less. Right now, I still really enjoy making things. I'm very fortunate that what I make has been well enough received to be able to support what I do. And my ideas sometimes are a little bit odd, so I'm kind of glad that they found their little niche.
Yeah, odd ideas. Recently you made a car?
Yeah, I just kind of slowly progressed into bigger. We were actually talking about I'm working smaller, but at a certain point I was just kind of on this progression of like, I'd start with small paintings, big paintings. Did a slot machine, and then I was like, well, I have to fully give credit to Rose Simpson. She made this amazing El Camino Maria, and it's a beautiful car. It's a black on black car that looks like Southwestern pottery, gorgeous. And I was like, man, that's such a great idea. And I knew, her reasons for doing it. And then, I basically stole the idea of like, well, I want to do a car, but I want to do it for different reasons. I wanted to take something and kind of extend that idea of using the entire buffalo. I took a car that had been wrecked and wasn't going to be, repaired. I bought it, fixed it up from the ground up, and then kind of turned it into an art piece. I did custom fabric for it, did a painting down the side. It really kind of started with my love of comic books and frustration as a native comic book fan as a kid. Everything was very...
Frustration, how? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, being a native comic book fan in the 90s, any comic book representation was very stereotypical. It was like, you knew he was the Indian guy because he had fringe and feathers, and his name was like Warpath or Shaman, or I was like, can it not just be... Isn't the most important thing that these guys have superpowers? Like, where is that on the scale? But it always just... They're very two-dimensional. And that was just strictly came from... not having native voices or representation in that industry, one that I really did love. And so on the passenger side of this car, it's got representations of comic books, some of the vintage comics with like Batman, Superman, Shazam, a dog, and they all have headdresses on. It's this like the Indian issue of Batman, And so that to me was the representation we'd been given. And so one of my big things is Cherokees. We have our own written language, and I like to utilize that as much as possible in my work. And so one of the concepts I worked on was creating a Cherokee Superman, replacing the S in his emblem with the Cherokee letter for the S sound, and kind of taking the most iconic superhero and keeping him that way, but making him look native and giving him just that little bit of native culture to where it's like, hey, he's a superhero, and oh, there's something else about him. That to me was always what I wanted out of my comics, a little more accurate representation, not like, I'm ending every day, and it's just a struggle, So, I was looking for something a little more authentic. And so that is what's down the driver's side. And there's lots of other little goodies in it. That's just the overall theme. The piece is called Shifting Paradigms because it's a manual car, and I get clever with my titles.
You do.
But yeah, I like just I like learning how to do things. I try to take an idea and not let a lack of knowledge stop me from making it. I'll figure it out. YouTube is an amazing resource. I've also been very fortunate to have an amazing community of friends, of artists that are very free with their knowledge. Marwan Begay was a huge help in making these serigraphs. He is a master printmaker who teaches at the University of Oklahoma and an award-winning artist of himself. And so I've just been very fortunate that people have been kind with their time and to show me how to do stuff. So I love that about the native art community.
Both of your works combine a lot of different influences. Could you tell us a little bit more about where you get your inspiration, or?
Primarily, it's, for me, is my lived experience growing up, but I had such a diverse experience moving through the Native communities, and I feel like primarily for me it's like clothing and regalia and the things that, because that's kind of where I also got my start was, so we were talking about just learning stuff, and the reason why I started to do beadwork was I didn't have enough money to buy it. And so I asked my grandmother, I was like, can you teach me? I'm one of those people, I'm like, I'm just gonna do it myself, I'm just gonna figure out how to do it. And, having these experiences growing up in the city, but also going back home to the reservation and kind of moving around the country and having all these different experiences, there is a common thread. And one of the threads is that our self-expression, like who we truly are on this earth through what we wear. And I really kind of have a tendency to focus on identity because of our history, like where my grandparents left the reservation, but also I grew up in the city. And so I feel like I'm always searching through identity and how do we express our identity, and clothing is such a good way to do that. And so those elements of self-expression have like made their way, but it's taken me quite a few years to really understand that about myself too, because when I did go to school and get my degree, I was doing printmaking, and I also kind of felt a disconnection to that, and it wasn't until I was living in Lawrence, Kansas in 2004, moved here to go to school, but then, had my children. And during the time I was raising my kids, I was just focusing on regalia and traditional like crafting. But I knew I needed to come back to a contemporary practice. And so I wanted to bring, I'm gonna beat up this mic. I wanted to bring those materials with me. Like I understood that about myself at an older age. And it took me still a few years to understand how I needed to apply that to my practice and what I wanted to say as an artist too. That took me, from what I'm doing now versus what we have in this collection here, it's such a huge gap. But that's part of the journey. Is it's just a journey, and not to dig myself into a hole what I think I need to make. I don't know. I didn't even think I answered the question.
Do you think art school might have done some violence?
Yes. Oh my gosh,
Because you had mentioned.
Because it was either or. That was what was so frustrating about the experience, was like, you can only be a fine arts master if you are working within these mediums.
Painting, printmaking,
painting, sculpture. And I excelled at those, and I liked it, but really understanding that connection to the material wasn't until later that that's what I needed to do, was connect to that material in order to express myself. And so beads became that, and I understood that and finally brought it into my practice. But there was so much teaching that I learned in that art school experience that I had to take 20 years to unlearn, to understand about myself as an artist and expressing myself, because it was at that time 20 years ago, which I'm totally dating myself, 24 years ago, oh my gosh, when I graduated, it was either or. There wasn't this acceptance.
Either fine art or craft.
There wasn't a bleeding together, there wasn't a blending, and it was either folk art or contemporary art, and there wasn't this bleeding. And now, you know, I've seen such a huge change in the art world and how people are using these materials and folk, you know, art and their material and their practices, to have this huge development in how we're able to express ourselves, especially people of color, I believe. You know, I believe that this acceptance has slowly made its way in for people to see that as art, you know?
Yeah, this last decade has seen a resurgence of
for sure.
Native art specifically.
Yeah.
Tom, did you agree that art school was a bad idea?
I will say this, like I said, I like to teach myself how to do things, so I dodged that bullet. I did see some friends that I really did think suffered at the hands of that, where I really loved they kind of lost that joie de vivre, I guess. I was just like, man, your work used to be so fun and loose, and now it's art school. I don't know. I don't know. But I also think that natives are so tied to trauma that was like, sure, art school, why not? You know?
Yeah. And two, also, I don't want to disparage because the education I got was really good, and we had like top tier art teachers, and they knew their craft, so they knew you know, what they were teaching. It just, for me, I needed to find that deeper connection to that material, and so understanding like content and understanding materials, and now I understand that, but it took this long for me to kind of be on a self journey to do that, as opposed to having somebody tell me or critique me in what I was doing, because that was hard too, you know. But yeah, it was a good education. I felt like you know, as a Native person being in a school, and I was one of the only Native people in there wasn't a way for me to connect. And even though I was so happy, James Luna had come to our school and did an artist, and and so he would come to our critiques, and I got to, you know, spend time with him, and he really did change the way that I thought about my own approach to art, and especially what I needed to speak on, and you know, especially about identity. I felt like I really gravitated towards his work in that sense, and so that was beneficial, and that was very helpful in my journey in art school.
I want to talk more about these materials.
Oh yeah.
You are painting on calico fabric. Weird.
Is it?
I'd never seen a painting on calico fabric. In fact, I was trying to figure out how you did it. You must have just sewed the figure first and then painted on top, because you leave the fabric. And then you're screen printing on antique ledger paper. So both the ledger paper and the calico fabric, of course, have histories. Would you please expand on those stories?
Go ahead.
Yeah, you go first.
So ledger art is kind of interesting. It's based on historic documents that during removal, tribes would, you know, tribal nations typically had an oral history. But as removal was kind of robbing them of that, they would depict historic moments for battles or just special moments in their history pictographically. And now there is a whole new generation of ledger artists that are using those as, I guess, as inspiration to create new versions of ledger art. I kind of play with it. I don't do anything traditionally, but I like to take that concept and play with it a little bit. The piece that I have over here, the Custer Target, my thing is this: if at that time in history, which is, I don't even remember what the date on that paper is, but it's kind of right around the time of
1890, 1880.
Yeah. So if they were going to print some targets, that's what they would have made. And so I just kind of found the humor in that. But I've taken that concept of ledger art and just really kind of use it every which way you can, except for, you know, the stereotypical traditional way, just because I'm I don't know, difficult that way. I have another piece that's floating around in here that I found was interesting. I did this series of ledger pieces with the original idea that companies were going to paperless. The company I worked for at the time, they were getting rid of all their paper processes and everything was going digital. And to me, that struck a chord because I was doing ledger art at the time, and I was like, well, what are future ledger artists going to work on? And there's not going to be paper. So I kind of had this idea of what the contemporary ledger is, and so I did ledger art on decommissioned hard drives with kind of contemporary native historical events in this series. The one that's here is the when they finally got rid of the Washington football team's name. It was 157 years from the origin of, or at least the first published use of that term, and it's just kind of one of those things that took way too long, but to me it was a massive kind of event in contemporary Native history. But I have a whole series of that. I just really like playing with that concept of maintaining that tradition, but how do you do that without paper?
And for me, calico fabric, there's a lot of fond memories of my grandmother making me dresses, and just seeing it with throughout Indian country and being used in our regalia. I just feel like it's a strong signifier of like our connection to each other too, as women, and how we like create things and pass it on between each other. But thinking about what you said, it's interesting. I felt like when I had come, so I made that piece in 2018, I believe. 2018, 19. And so I was at the very beginning of practicing contemporary art again, and after coming from just focusing solely on like traditional crafting and regalia making, I think those materials were still really close to me, and I didn't want to leave it behind. And I was still trying to figure out how I was going to express myself too. So that piece that they have, that's like one of the only figurative pieces I've done, and it's the only one I've done on calico. And since then, I've used a lot of these different materials in different ways. But it's, I've also made like breastplates out of SSD cards that I, scavenged from the scrapyard in Lawrence. And I feel like that's another kind of push and pull as a Native artist. Like, we're having to try to push these boundaries that are like these preconceived ideas about like what Native art should be, and try not to fall into that trap either, but express ourselves through our worldview. And so I feel like when I use these other materials, like if you see the gas mask up here on the screen, that's my way of exploring, like, how do we push these boundaries and how do we express ourselves in this world and still hold true to these traditional thoughts and applications of materials. And so, that piece is just really the very beginning of me exploring that. And I think since then I've really pushed these boundaries. And then there just came a point where in my journey, probably like 4 years ago, where I was making all this art that was like really directly talking about our trauma, and then I really didn't want to live there anymore. I felt like I needed to move past that, and I was like, why aren't we, focusing on the joy or our resiliency, or like there's all these other parts of our people that are well expressed in how we live our lives. Like, that's where I need to be as an artist, and I need to be able to express myself as an artist and as a human being and a Native woman without these confines either of our trauma or our history, that I can create so that if there are other Natives looking at my art, they will recognize that and understand that, but so will everybody else, so they can connect to that too. And seed beads, they are so widely used across the entire world in so many different cultures, but they come from these colonial like connections, but what I love about them is that they have transcended that, like, because people have taken that and they are using it in their own cultural expression and identity. So that to me now has become the symbol of resiliency and self-expression, outside of these, the confines of colonialism. So, yeah.
That seems like a pattern for colonized people to take the materials and the symbols of the dominant culture and indigenize
And
them.
even take it further, because if you look at how seed beads are applied, a lot of times historically to stuff, we've really taken it. And I always say, like, I mean, if natives are going to beat it, they'll beat it. Like, just beat it. Like, yeah. And the way that we've taken it and just taken it further beyond what anybody's ideas about that. That's what I love about it.
And I was not familiar with the woman that you rendered on that fabric. Could you tell us a little bit more about who that is?
Zitkala, she was an advocate for Native rights, and she did theater, and she, for me, it kind of symbolizes, women's empowerment at a time when women didn't really have a voice, which was like, in the early 1900s. So, yeah, she just kind of, that pose that she's doing is just so powerful that I really felt connected to that pose that she's doing, like looking into the future or seeing further than maybe what her confines were and how she was able to advocate for herself as a Native woman. Yeah.
Some of the juxtapositions you're providing us are quite jarring, both of you, whether it's a gas mask or, Tom, you have a peyote fan that's made out of a lightsaber.
Nice.
And it's called
When
The Sith Hits the Fan.
So when the Sith hits the fan. I started because I really wanted to make a fan, and my favorite color is black, and somebody gifted me this really beautiful black wing. I don't know exactly what it is, and they probably told me not to just so I wouldn't get in trouble with having it, but anyway. And so I didn't quite know what to do with it. I knew I wanted to make a fan. I was like, well, I'm going to make the fan that Darth Vader would carry, and this is all black. And so yeah, I had watched a documentary about the original props for the Star Wars movies, and just how basic. I mean, it was really, they just went out and found stuff and kind of taped it and glued it together. The original lightsaber handles were flashbulb handles for antique cameras. So I went down to the hardware store and bought a bunch of plumbing implements and built a lightsaber handle that was very, very convincing. But yeah, like I said,
That's good.
I work backwards off titles a lot of the times. But yeah, when the Sith hits the fan, I was just like, I've got to totally make this thing now.
That's a good title.
Yeah,
And it's really funny.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what most people, at least with my work, they're kind of surprised by is humor. And to me, Native people are funny. And I think a lot of it is a trauma response. I mean, you have to kind of have a sense of humor about things if you've seen so much. And so, yeah, you can never really rob us of our humor. And so the majority of what I make has some level of joke or satire or ironic punch to it. I just, yeah, I like to make people laugh. And going back to your point about natives taking over a colonial item, Star Wars is definitely in that realm, because I don't think I know a native artist that hasn't made some Star Wars piece.
It's
somewhere or
tradition
the other,
now.
Tradition.
Like,
It's a rite of passage.
it is. Well, the funny thing is, I was just asked for an image of that fan for a presentation about native artists who had made Star Wars specific items, and I've heard people ask me a lot of times why they think, or why Native people identify so much with Star Wars, and I'm like, well, look at the story. It's a small, scrappy band of rebels that are fighting a colonial superpower, and they win. It's like, hey, this could work out this way. So yeah, I mean, well, and also there's the whole mysticism and connection to the Force thing. You know, it's like, it fits us, I guess. But yeah, and a lot of times it is just the underdog story that or being on the just side of things, I guess.
I will say I'm a huge Dune fan, so I like Star Wars, but Dune is it for me. It really like had a huge influence on, especially like the type of like native futurism that I think about. And so, yeah. So it's yeah, for me it's Dune.
I love Indigenous futurisms. They're fun.
Yes, and actually that's just going to be opening here in the Audrey in LA. This native Indigenous futurism show. Yeah. Sorry.
It's so important to imagine Indigenous people in the future because so much of our media places indigeneity in the past.
Well, that's what that piece is right there for
yeah.
me, is that I love the mid-century modern style, architecture, everything. But Native culture is always kind of pinpointed in the Western era. And I'm like, no, that's a whole series I did that puts characters from Native stories into that mid-century modern beatnik era, because Natives lived through that. We had houses like that. We dressed like that. But for some reason, whenever people think of Native culture, they never put it in that time period. So I try to, like, I've done this with the 80s, with the 90s. I try to kind of show Native culture throughout time to where, you know, it's like, hey, we've been here the entire time. We were not eradicated. We're still here. And so it's just one of those things that's like, hey, this is just our little pop of Native culture throughout time.
Yeah, and you know, the way I think about it is, you know, our ancestors were already thinking about our futures, so in a way that really made them native futurisms, and we are, you know, essentially living in a post-apocalyptic world from what we lived and our ancestors lived in, and so, you know, we are living through that and creating through that, and then also thinking about our future generations as well. So it's kind of like a circular type concept where there's not, time isn't linear in that sense, where, you know, if we're carrying all this knowledge with us from the past and we're still applying it to today and thinking about our future and how our future generations are going to carry that knowledge forward, that makes us right now presently native futurists, you know. I mean, creating the work that goes along with that concept as well. But yeah, I feel like no matter what we make right now is still going to be native future, and whatever our ancestors make, they were thinking about us and the decisions that they made for us to be here, you know, or what they lived through for us to be here. So yeah, it's circular, I think. Really.
7 generations.
Yeah, exactly.
7 generations. Are we in that generation now, or is that, where are we now?
Well, I think the point for me, at least, of that is to, you know, when you're making decisions, think impact of 7 generations.
Yeah.
You know, that is, I think that's how a lot of Native leadership is thinking now, kind of taking that concept from our ancestors and applying it to today, whether that is how they invest their funds and, you know, the industries that they support. But I see it in, you know, language revitalization, in the support for traditional and contemporary Native arts, and to try and kind of language preservation, I think, is the biggest one for me, just because you can't be a culture without a language. And so I really am thankful that we have the kind of leadership to recognize that need and recognize that those generations in the future will have that need for that knowledge, and supporting and recording it now.
It's maddening to imagine how many languages we lose every year. And languages, our entire cultures or entire worlds get lost. Art, though, if it's, I don't know if we want to define it, but it definitely preserves ideas. It protects ideas like armor. In fact, I think art and armor are etymologically connected. And it raises awareness. And I'd like to know, what do you think, or what kind of awareness do you want to raise? What do you want us to be thinking more about with your work?
I think I'm still asking myself that question because I've gone through so many stages as an artist in these pivots and how I approach art. But I think for myself, being able to really embrace self-expression and be comfortable and have confidence within that, to know what I'm making is just an expression and that's what I made, and to move on and just to keep creating and being more comfortable in my voice, but also what I need to say. I feel like because I do public art and I also, create in my studio and, show other places. Anyways, my public art persona is different than as an artist as it is for like my studio art persona. There's two different approaches, and for me, I feel like normalizing our culture, like how we identify in the visual like landscape of our cities, is important to normalize that, and but not for others, so that we can kind of see ourselves in our city and feel like a sense of embrace by seeing this art that we understand. But then also bridging that gap for, non-natives to see it and hopefully understand too, or maybe even work towards understanding, like that we are thriving culture right now. Like, we're not a relic of the past. We are here, and it's at almost like a maddening pace how things change and how people express themselves. I mean, there's just constant trends that are happening within, our culture, and it's changing rapidly. And I guess with more access that we have to all these different materials, it's just like adding to the way that we express ourselves. And so keeping up with that, but being able to see ourselves and understand that we are still a part of all of this. So I think with my art, it's just normalizing those things, and it's not such an oddity, but then also so natives can be in those spaces and see ourselves and understand that. And even though I feel like my work lives in between that, because that's how I feel I live, I live in between these, having to really work towards living and practicing traditional like ways. I feel like that has to be more of I feel like I have to work more towards that, as opposed to just, going about your daily business, because here we are speaking English and we're wearing the clothes we're wearing, and, we drive in our cars. And so to actively be pursuing traditional life ways is, it takes more effort too, but then practicing the things that my grandparents had taught me, so that my kids can carry on that knowledge and those teachings. I think I've talked my way away from the thing, but I just think that's trying to bridge all those things and then also express myself as an artist. So it's still, this is like, I was like, if you have made it to your destination as an artist, and what's the point of the journey? So it's just going to always be a constant exploration for me of what I want to say, or is this what I want to say right now? Because it also depends on how I feel, what I want to say or what I want to focus on. And, there was this idea that I had to have this like really confounded like body of work that's cohesive, and I see what I'm actually doing and it's all over the place, but I'm like, well, that's who I am. I'm all over the place. I want to learn how to do stuff on my own, and like I'm always a DIYer, and like, let's figure this out. And so I feel like I'm working my way towards itself, like burning the candle at both ends, and it's burning towards maybe finally a solidified artistic voice. But for now, I'm just all over the place, which is good. I like it.
Yeah, I identify with just about everything there. No, it's, I don't know. I make the stuff that I want to see, right? Because like I said, I've had the ideas, and I've asked people to make things, and I've had really great renditions of what I've asked for. What I love is when I've got something weird in my mind and I actually can kind of make that come out of thin air, make it happen.
So do you receive visions? It's like I hear musicians kind of hear melodies and then they write them down. Where do you get your ideas?
Oh, God. It's a lot of times it comes from conversations. I speak in pop culture, like movie quotes. So yeah, I knew that quote exactly. It was like, oh yeah, I know that Will Ferrell quote.
Same.
But so that's a language that I use to communicate quite a bit. Whether it's pop art inspiration from Liechtenstein or Warhol, or it's the Batman 1966 logo in Cherokee, or Patrick Nagel crossing ledger art with Back to the Future. I mean, it's all things I use iconography from the dominant culture, but kind of give the native perspective on that. And so it's a little bit of like the passerby kind of sees something that they're familiar with, draws them to the piece, and then there's just a connection that's made. Hopefully, like whatever I'm trying to convey from that piece is conveyed. For me, it works best if I'm around, which is not the easiest thing to do all the time. I really like interactions with people. I like to see them pick out a piece, and then I will ask them, what is it that you liked about this? And then, do you understand, what I'm trying to go for here? A lot of times, it's an opportunity for me to tell stories. Like, I get to tell people the Deer Woman story from all of these different versions of Deer Woman I've painted. That's my favorite story growing up. Like, my mom told it to me when I was way too young, and it's just terrified me as a kid ever since. But I love her as a character, and just everything about her, as she's been explained to me at least. But I like to take my artwork as an opportunity to familiarize people with my cultures, and also to dispel a lot of stereotypes of just pan-Indianism for one thing, and just remind people of little things. I did a series of ball-headed war clubs that incorporated vintage Pontiac hood ornaments, because I wanted to take, first of all, just to remind everybody, Pontiac was a real person. He was a native leader from the Michigan area. And a lot of people don't even know that. It's just the car company.
They hear Pontiac, they think car. They hear Apache, they think helicopter.
Or Cadillac, same thing. So
Winnebago.
Right. So from the 30s to the 60s, Pontiac had these really cool stylized Indian head hood ornaments that I incorporated into a ball-headed war club. Re-indigenizing a stolen image, putting it on something that's actually native. But to me, I call those things, my man magnets, because every guy has to stop and ask me, do you know what this is? Oh, yes, I made it. I know what it is. But it's a conversation starter. It's like, yes, it's a Pontiac. Did you know Pontiac was a real person? And I will tell that story 500 times that day. But that's 500 people that maybe didn't know that before. And, those are the kind of opportunities that I look for. I'm not trying to, communicate to everybody. It would be great, but I, do it individually, and I'm fine with that.
Has there ever been a time when one of your viewers has taught you something about your work that you didn't see before?
Yeah, I think the large beaded pieces that I make, in a way, are like these visual vessels. Because people, when they approach them, they can only respond to that piece from their own experiences. I'm creating from my own experiences, but it's organic enough and not vague, but it's open to interpretation by the viewer. And I can try to say what I want to say, but I can't tell you what to think. You know what I mean? You can only think about from your own experiences. And so I think the pieces that I make are up for a lot of interpretation. And so when people express how the things that they see in there, it makes me look at my work in a different way too, which I like. I enjoy it. I like to see how people interact with my pieces, especially the long beaded pieces. I mean, those to me are, they're not the funnest to make. I love making them, but they take forever. And but I love to see how people are interacting with that and what they're taking away from it. Because you can get so close to the work and so caught up in what you're making, that even though when I'm standing back and I see the direction that it needs to go, I still don't have a complete idea about what I'm envisioning, because I feel like it needs to grow on itself into itself. And I'm kind of like guiding hands in that sense. And so I usually kind of map out what I'm doing, and then it grows and expands on its own, or even subtracting away. And that's particularly those beaded pieces that I'm using with the beeswax. And so I've heard so many different interpretations of how people are, what they're seeing in that work, and I enjoy it because I feel like it's, even what you're seeing, it's there's something there, it's still open for interpretation, like that piece behind you. That was my first piece, and so when I went on to do further work, I was expressing myself in the shapes that I was using, and I feel, I kind of think of them as organic abstractions. They just take on the life of their own, and they're also in conversation with what's happening with that wood too, because there's so much beauty that's going on within that, and the rings are evidence of that life that had happened. It's just like this body left over, but it's a conversation between, what I'm experiencing with that, and that, also my attempt to reconnect to nature. But yeah, everybody's experiences are different, which I love,
I love painting with oil on wood.
Yeah.
And oil paint, if you don't know, is a semi-transparent paint that when it hardens, it's like glass. I mean, it's like amber hardening.
Yeah.
And so I kind of saw this, you're painting with glass on wood. It's like the evolution of something that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, and I mean, all the elements that I'm using in those beaded pieces, everything is natural. I mean, aside from probably the glue, but like you have to use something. But everything else comes from this natural material, and I've also come to really realize too, it also goes through a process of like fire or warmth is needed to make those elements, like drying the wood, it needs to be heated in a kiln, and the beads are heated in a really hot fire, and so the beeswax needs to be warmed up, and I'm cold all the time, so I'm like, is this like my unconscious way of staying warm? Like, I don't know, but it's all that really kind of came to that knowing of these materials, because I'm with them all like so many hours in a day, and like for months, and so really getting acquainted with that material. But it's just, it's self-expression. Like for me, it's like impressionism, I guess, right? Like, but it's at a really like super slow pace, and because my mind is always like going and running, like, with 300 tabs open, and I'm always having these ideas. Because you were asking, like, where does your ideas come? I'm like, well, insomnia is one of them, and like, my brain's inability to turn off. But
where do ideas come
from? I know,
from?
they just they come at nighttime when I'm trying to go to bed.
Trying to sleep. Exactly.
Exactly. I'm like, that's a really good idea. Yeah. Write it down and then go to bed.
That's what I do.
I mean, we receive thousands of ideas a day, and if you don't write it down, you're not going to.
Yeah, it does. There's been so many good ones that have just gone out to the ether, and I'm like, but yeah, it's just where do they come from? I want to know too, but kind of allowing myself to express it, but at a slower pace, because that gives moving in these fast paces, and the idea of painting fast or even like spray painting, that scares me. So I don't know why. It's just the thought like, oh, that's, it's out of my control now. I don't know. But making these expressive pieces with the beeswax, it takes like a lot of intention, but I'm still able to work with it and create and let the piece become itself, even though I don't really have to.
I also imagine the repetition is hypnotic.
It is. You can get into a very meditative state, but then there's times when I have to just really power through it, because I'm like, wanting to get up and want to go weed in my garden, and I need to do this and this and that, and then I'm like, no, you have to sit down and do this, for 6 hours.
Do you ever feel, though, that making is selfish?
It is.
Because you spend hours and hours,
Yes.
sometimes just thinking about the work in your studio, and we've got other responsibilities.
Yeah, especially
Like
when
family.
I haven't seen my kids in like, all day and they've been at school and, and I'm thinking like, I'm just out here making art. Oh my gosh, you're a terrible mother. But at the same time, I'm showing them like, okay, this is also a path. I try to remind myself that. I'm like, I'm also being a good example for them too, because I am following what I need to do this. If I don't do it, I'm going to lose it. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Good.
Well, I was going to say, artwork or making can be a spiritual practice. What is spirituality for both of you?
You want to do that one first?
Okay, yeah, I mean, I grew up, practicing and going to ceremony, and
Ceremony, what does that mean?
different types of ceremonies too, because of my experience of living in the Pacific Northwest. We would go to the longhouses and go to the feasts, but then we would also attend like a Lakota Sundance, and then also an Arapaho Sundance in Wyoming. And so I've had all these different experiences. But I would say generally it's like a practice of, Native spirituality. But I've been exposed to the other ones, and I never really felt like a connection to them, and so a lot of that works its way into my practice because, I'm creating something from nothing. It's coming literally from my brain and my hands, and I'm pulling it from this almost like another world in a sense. And so I feel like I need to hold that in reverence and approach it with respect too, because it's coming from nowhere. And not really, it's coming from me, and it's coming from my experiences, but at the same time, it's becoming on its own. And so I feel that needs respect. And so I do try to approach it with a sense of these other spiritual practices that I can kind of incorporate into either what I'm doing prior to that, or even when I'm making the beeswax for those large pieces. I'm bringing in these different resins that we would use for purifying, because I need that connection to that material. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've never really had a connection to organized religion.
Yeah.
Mostly just because, I don't know, I was fortunate, or it was explained to me kind of at an early age, the role it played in kind of the attempt to destroy Native culture. And so I've always kind of had a little bit of a issue with it just based on that. But I don't even know if it's spirituality, but it's just the community of, Native ceremony and the, taking medicine and just being around generations of your people, and the exchange of culture and ideas that happens just organically, just from kind of being around your people. And so I really have always valued that. I don't know how much it plays a part of my work. I tend to be on the sillier side of things.
Well, I think, was it the Dalai Lama who said, if you're not laughing, then what's the point
Right.
with your practice?
Yeah. So.
Well, and that's an important part too, because we have parts where you have to have laughter after the hard
for
times.
sure. Right.
For healing.
But yeah, I just have always found the comfort in community, which I also did kind of grow up. I was born in Oklahoma, lived in North Carolina, out there,
Yeah.
North Dakota for a while, so your people, and then back to Oklahoma. So I've kind of had samplings of, the different, and I spent a lot of time in the Southwest, so I've kind of
Yeah.
seen a lot out there, and I've always enjoyed it. And it is interesting, like when I visited other Native communities, I generally have been widely embraced. I kind of just recognize another Native person, and I've always loved learning other people's traditions, joining other ceremonies, feasts, things like that. Just kind of seeing how their culture celebrates their culture, because it's, even in Oklahoma, just vastly different from tribe to tribe.
Yeah. And I always feel like every year I'm married my husband is Osage, and so we go to the yearly dances. And I always think of it as like recharging my native battery, because that connection to those songs and everybody gathered, and food too. Oh my gosh. And so like the experience, huh? Oh, wow. Well, it
Depends
varies.
on where you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, regionally, you know, like I had never had fried salt pork or even okra before. When I moved here, it was like this hugely different experience for me. But, you know, I grew up eating salmon and camas and, you know, all these different other foods from the Northwest. But then you go kind of into the interior, and then you have this commodity food where you get fry bread and, like, you know, a lot of pasta.
Spam.
Yeah, spam, goulash, and, like, you know, the commodity cheese, like, and
Commodity being the food.
that was given to
Yeah.
our different reservations. You would get commodity food, which was like government food, and it was like cheese, like powdered eggs,
Peanut butter.
peanut. Oh my God, the peanut
Some of
butter
the
was so
things in the
hard.
photograph over here on the wall.
Yeah,
Beef and
exactly.
juices.
Part of that, yeah. And so meat and juice is like pork. It just says pork on the side, and so, you know, and that was largely in these experiences of eating, but then everybody coming together and needing food is such a huge part of ceremonies too, and so. Even the experience of like waking up and smelling the campfire and like the coffee, you know, and bacon being, you know, over, you know, you're just out in the campground. That in itself is almost spiritual. Like, you know, it is, because then you look back on it, it reminds you. So anytime you smell a fire, you're like, oh, you know, that one time at camp, like, you know, there's all these parts that are a full experience. It's everything. It's like there's, you know, these connections that happen tactily, and, you know, your every sense is like a part of that. And then the connections we have with each other, you know, and you get to see people every single year and revisit your friends, and that community, that sense of community, because you've all experienced something together, and then you all go about your lives, and then you come back and experience it again. And knowing that you can rely on those people because of these teachings and how we help each other. So yeah, there's a lot that comes along with that lifestyle. It's not like just something you just do. It's a whole way of life throughout the year too, because all those teachings extend to everything that you do for everybody around you all year long too. Yeah.
So I know some of this work is older work.
Yeah.
And artists sometimes are secretive about what they're working on now. Do you mind sharing what you're working on right now?
Go ahead.
I'm probably moving to a dangerous venture. I bought a metal smelter.
Oh, right. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll keep all my digits in place.
Oh my gosh.
I have some ideas for jewelry, but I want to incorporate some inlaid polished metal into some of my woodwork, and it's just, I have lots of little ideas of things I want to make out of metal. But yeah, that goes on to my incidental learning method of art, just like, oh, I don't have one of those, let's get one and play with it and try not to burn the house down, you know. So hopefully that'll happen, or not happen, I guess.
Right. Probably still using a lot of the same materials I use, but venturing into more sculptural work, trying to figure that out, you know, because it's a challenge, and that's what I like too, is trying to figure out how to make it stand. And then installation too, but I'm getting a dose of that right now, and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, because I do like the idea of filling these spaces, especially with pieces of my past, like these experiences I had growing up, and this connection to fabric, because I feel like fabric can be something that's just wholly overlooked, but then at the same time, it's such a huge part of experience, you know, walking through the world. I mean, we kind of we overlook it because we're like, oh, I'm just wearing this shirt, whatever, but
It's our second skin.
it is. And then, you know, but then can be all of these like experiences attached to that. And I have these pieces that are on the slides where these round pieces, and I'm thinking about materials as like these parts of sediment, like in layers, like how they would do archaeological digs and they're cutting through all those layers and it's exposing these layers of experience, and thinking about memories in that sense, and like how it's attached to materials and like how that settles too in our mind. And so, yeah, that right now I think I've just been like treading water, like going from project to project. And so I think I'm like, I'm just gonna cook and take care of my family for a little bit and then jump back into it, I guess. But yeah, doing installation here in the future, and then doing more, and just having time in my studio to like explore too, and just make, because I've been going project to project. I don't feel like I've had very much breathing room to just make without this expectation of what it needs to be too. So that piece right there is the one that I finally just recently did. This is my most recent beaded piece that I did, and I've really branched out from how I'm approaching that work, so I want to take that further too, and also getting away from the wood that I'm using, I feel like, as an anchor, because I feel like it's almost like a safety net in a way. Like a safety blanket, it brings me comfort, but I'm like, I need to push past that and create using forms. So yeah.
So what is some advice that you would give young artists?
I would just say, find a good group of friends, and just make stuff, just to make it. Like, make what you want to make, and let your audience find you. The worst thing you can do is to make something as a commodity, because that's rarely as authentic or sought after. I just made the stuff that I wanted. And so it's weird to me when other people, I'm like, oh, okay, you like that? Okay. It's kind of surprised.
Yeah.
I a lot of times I just make stuff for myself and I'm like, oh, that's sold? Okay.
Someone else
Surprise.
sold?
Okay. Okay. It's
Right.
awesome. I thought I was taking that home. And, that's what I would say. I always tell artists, just make it. Just do what you want to do. Don't worry about the sales, or don't worry about, focusing on getting into shows. Just start with making good art that you like, that you want to see, and then the rest should develop. I can't promise anything. But
Yeah. Yeah, just practice. Like, make it. Not every piece is going to be the ultimate piece. Like, it's just because the more you do and then you keep doing it, you're like, okay, there's almost like a developed sense of confidence, because you're like, I've done that, now I know. It's almost like making, then you know what not to do too. You're like, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, so it just, but working through that, and don't be afraid to just go and create and expect it to be this, like, this masterpiece of art. It's like, that's, you have to work through that and to that. And eventually, sometimes something really beautiful will come out of it, and sometimes not. I was like, there is so many failed experiments in my studio right now that are just like tucked away and I'm embarrassed by, and I don't want to show anybody. But I learned something from that. Like, I learned what not to do, and what's working and what isn't working. And like, I have 4 pieces hanging up right now where I'm like, what was that? Like, and so finding joy in just making, and not having this expectation that it needs to be something more. Because that will come eventually. That confidence will come.
When I find that that's, oddly enough, something like, I feel like Native artists get caught in all these weird double standards of, there's an immediate expectation of, if you're going to make something, it's for sale.
Exactly, yeah.
And then also that everything has to have a deeper meaning,
Yeah.
or referential points. Like, hey, sometimes that's just a cool looking bird.
I know,
it's like,
right?
And I don't know why I made it. It just felt right.
It just looked cool.
Like, I want to do a bunch of stuff with like elk and deer, and I just want to make it, but I don't, does it need to have this assigned meaning to it? Like,
Right.
Because I gravitate towards those things, and they are a part of my experience, but can I just add it without it needing to be something more? Or, so those are the things that I feel like, yeah, as a Native artist, you kind of get pigeonholed too, and like, it has to have a deeper level of meaning, and it's like, I just want to make it. Can I just make it without having this attachment?
That's why I kind of felt justified in skipping art school, because I get critiqued on every single piece by every person. Well, what does this mean? Oh my God. Well, okay, let me give you my thesis on this, and then it's like, oh, I'm good.
And I like sold this really cool painting I did of this type of bird, and I loved it. Like I made these ginormous paintings in like 2 days. Like I was like rushing, but I felt so sure in what I was doing. But the birds, swallows, that's what they're called, I believe. It was just something I saw. Like I was out painting a mural in Topeka, and my daughter was with me, and I saw those. They were there. They were just swooping around, and it just was such a neat experience. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna do a big old bird. Like, so this bird is on this like huge canvas, and it's just one bird, and that's it. And sometimes I feel like I need to do something deeper, but sometimes you just want to paint a bird, like and that's okay. Like it's okay to play with the colors and see what you like, I guess, and just that's something that I'm still working through myself. So
I think I don't ever think there's anything wrong with playing with color or
Right.
doing something that's non-traditional. That's where I live, is non-traditional.
yeah.
But if I ever think maybe I shouldn't do that, I'm like, oh, I definitely need to do
Yeah.
that. Then like that's for sure. That's my gauge generally.
Yeah.
Well, Mona, Tom, and David, thank
No.
you so much. I'm
No,
going to go
we're
ahead
not-
and cut in. I know, and it's a shame too, because I feel I'm enjoying this so much, and I know we all are, and we could certainly, obviously, we could go for a whole nother hour.
Right.
This is such a wonderful, rich conversation. It's been such a wonderful thing, but we did start a little late, so we went a little late. If you do need to go ahead and go, that's okay. But we're just about time. I know in the spirit of promising a Q&A, I will take one. If anyone here has one, is there one
Burning
good question?
That we can answer
got it.
promptly, so everybody can go.
Yes, I'll go ahead.
Tom started out and you said, well, that's Indian time. I'm
Oh.
wondering, what was that all about?
Oh, like
That's just
Circle,
It's
yeah.
it's every native's excuse when they're late. No, we're starting on Indian time.
Yeah.
It's just running a little behind. Just like that's just Indian time,
Yep.
and that unfortunately is a reality for a lot of tribal
Yeah.
things. Most tribal things don't start on time. So never, if you're running a little behind on something, don't sweat it.
Yep. It's
Everybody
Indian
else
time.
is too.
Yeah.
So we're right on time, in other words.
Right.
yeah.
Oh yes. Okay.
That's
I'm
good.
sorry.
I will do one final one, and we'll try to just be very brief. But we have one question. We have some people streaming this at home, which is great.
Well, now you tell me.
Well, yeah. So hello everyone at home. So I did just want to have the one of the questions that came in, and this kind of goes on kind of your current projects in the works, but to sort of take this a step further. One viewer wanted to know if you had a blank check to go any medium, any mode, any maybe organization. Is there any one big project, blank check, no restrictions? What would that goal be? What would that look like for you?
Is that a question of with the end goal being a finished piece or a project, or
I think
fairly open-ended?
I think it's pretty open-ended. The question being any project or initiative in any medium at the largest scale.
Well,
What
if this
would you
is-
make?
If this
So,
is a
okay, that
potential
changes
funder, you can reach out to me at I have lots of ideas.
Yeah.
If anybody would like to
We
hear
can
it.
connect you with Tom's information links.
Was it Christo and was it
Jean-Claude,
Jean-Claude. That would be the level I would go if I could. Like if
wrap
it
an
was-
island,
Yes.
wrap a building.
Oh yeah,
And
I would
fabric,
go.
and
I
calico
would go
fabric.
that. I would go there if I had a lot of not volunteers, a lot of assistance
you're
and
paying them, just a
help,
blank
and
check.
somebody in an open check. I'm like, I would go there.
And that would be excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I've done a car. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Do an airplane.
Yeah, no, I would love to do like an immersive experience kind of thing. I think that would be amazing. Kind of work with, what I would like to do is employ a bunch of Native artists just to make the
Yes.
weirdest stuff
Oh
they
my
could think
gosh.
of and show it in a building and make people go look at it.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think it would be very interesting to kind of see everything kind of from that perspective, you know, and just kind of like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know. I think there's an opportunity there that doesn't really exist, and I think would be something really interesting.
Yeah. I need
Excellent.
minions. I need a lot of minions.
Well, we've got to leave it there, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
I just want to.
I know there's a question down front. I'll
Oh,
be hanging
sure.
out
Oh,
afterwards.
Certainly, yes.
to
Okay,
ask
yes,
if-
sure. We can,
I'll
if you're
to.
willing to do that, that'd be
Volunteering you
great.
now, by the way.
I'll go ahead and just close the show, but I wanted just to thank you all again. So very grateful that you've joined us tonight, and thank everyone for coming.
Thank you all for coming.